Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked. You can't have a successful career without knowing how to deal with the unexpected, and Unlocked is here to help you do exactly that. This is a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options from which to choose. Curious about the background of this show? Check out my book, Unlocked: Discover How to Embrace the Unexpected. It's available on Kindle, audio, and paperback. If you would like to explore what it means to build and nurture your resilience with me as your mentor, reach out directly to me to schedule a conversation. Email at madeline@madelineblair.com. We have 3 things for today. First, we will describe the major shifts in today's environment for business to give us all some background. Then my guest, Dr. Sandy Kolberg, will join me in conversation about these shifts for businesses and for your career as you navigate yourself in this same environment. Finally, I'll talk about the full list of business shifts identified in McKinsey's most recent report, State of Organizations 2023. Our show today is called Being the Driver in the Midst of Changes. And before we begin talking about being the driver, let's look at the shifts that businesses are facing today. You know, companies like Apple, Google, and Amazon are always in the news because we can see the effect they affect many people and whole economies. But at the heart of the U.S. economy are small and medium-sized companies. Here are some statistics about small businesses, which, by the way, are defined as having fewer than 500 employees. In other words, where startups sit. There are 33.2 million small businesses in the U.S. And I apologize to those of you who are watching from other countries because I don't have your numbers. Small businesses contribute 44% of the U.S. economic activity. Small businesses generate 8.7 million new jobs between March 2020 and March 2022. And that's during the pandemic. Yes, small companies generate millions of jobs each year and account for 64% of new jobs in America. The biggest challenge reported by small businesses is labor quality, at 52% reporting that. Now let's talk about mid-sized companies. Over the last decade, 39.8% of mid-sized companies reported a loss. 33% reported year-on-year decreases in sales, and 47% reported declines in annual profit. Just think of the retail industry since the introduction of online sales. Leaders of mid-sized businesses must understand that a booming stock market is not an accurate reflection of the on-the-ground reality for most American corporations. The environment, however, in which all companies find themselves was reported by McKinsey, and here are 3 that we'll try to speak to today. The report says that about 40% of respondents point to complex organizational structure as a cause of inefficiency. In other words, sometimes the structure of an organization really doesn't make it easy for the roles and responsibilities to actually do what they're asked to do. The research also shows that in many organizations, between 20 and 30% of critical roles aren't filled by the most appropriate people. Yet, believe it or not, the highest performers in a role, okay, when you do have a good match, they are 800% more productive than average performers in the same role. And only 5% of respondents say their organizations already have the capabilities that they need. Half of the respondents to the survey say their organization is unprepared to react to future shocks. Those able to do so resiliently may gain significant advantages over the others. You know I love that. This is an area of need of opening possibilities. We won't cover all of them, but we'll touch on several. So let's get started. I'm going to bring my guests onto the screen. Sandy, welcome.
Good morning.
Unlocked. Good
I am so pleased to be with you this morning. Thank you, Madeline, for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Let me tell the audience a little bit about you. Dr. Sandy Kolberg is owner and organizational strategist of Stratagems LLC. It's a company focused on creating the synergy of people, process, and strategy, building on the most dynamic aspects of any organization, namely the people, using processes to support growth and wrapping both in strategic thinking and planning to help leaders create sustainable growth cultures. Dr. Kolberg is Professor Emeritus of Walden University, by the way, a university that was designed from the beginning to work virtually. Now, while there, she was the program director of the College of Management and Technology's PhD Management Program. She's also a certified executive management consultant and was a certified Gazelles coach. She develops strategic frameworks for companies and individuals and offers private and public workshops with a focus on developing leaders. You know, Sandy, what I really love that you have working is that you've worked both at the conceptual level and the practical application of those concepts in real companies. Your focus is often at the mid-size, but I'm sure you've done more. So let's look forward to how strategy changes for this organizational segment that is under such pressures today. So again, Sandy, welcome.
Thank you. Boy, that introduction is as tall as I
am. Well, I did my best.
You did a great job. Thank you.
Oh, my.
I started out in business almost by default because every time I worked internally at a large company, something happened and I ended up, for various reasons, starting again. And so it was interesting to start consulting in about 1992 and as consulting within a larger organization. One of our utilities here in town had a 2-year business program for small and medium-sized businesses. And a couple of us got together and built a curriculum for that. And then we became presenters and also mentors to these companies. Some of those companies became clients. And so that's where I started with that whole idea of small and mid-sized companies. Coincidentally, what I realized is, and I've always liked to be working right on that adjacent edge, that place where most people don't think about, and yet that there's a huge need. And lots of business consultants like to be in those larger companies. What I found is that medium-sized and small entrepreneurial company needed help. And it was a great place to be, and some of those are still clients today, so I guess it was a good move.
And the other thing is that in a small company, oftentimes when you get the right leverage point, you can just do amazing things for that company.
Yes. You had asked me originally what was the difference between working in large companies and in small and medium-sized companies. And the thing that what came right to mind was scale. In a large company, you have so many layers and layers of bureaucracy and policies and procedures that have to be met. And in the smaller and medium-sized businesses, you're close to the top. So you're heard differently, even as a regular employee, let alone the leadership team is making all kinds of huge decisions in great ways every single day. And it's exciting. It's fun.
Yeah. I recall those when I was working much more with companies. I now spend more of my time on television than not. But it was very gratifying when you were talking directly to the CEO and they
Right.
thanked you for the work that you had done. I mean, those were the days when you could just, or for me, when I could just say, okay, I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get it.
So what have you seen, though, in seen change in companies that you've worked with? What are the primary issues that a mid-sized company faces? I mean, we've already talked about the fact that they're almost in stress today.
Well, one of the things I think that we have to set as foundation is that every single business, no matter what size it is, has 4 areas it has to deal with on a continuous basis. And you hit on the first one, or when you talked about having the right people in the right place.
Mm.
If you don't hire carefully and get the right people in the right places doing the right things, then you have constant turnover and you can't build a good, solid culture. And so that's probably the first area that I think is important. The second is strategy. If you don't have a track to run on, then everything becomes reactive. And when you're reactive, everything that comes up is just what you're dealing with, instead of planning and looking at what you can proactively accomplish. So putting a strategy under you gives that opportunity to have a track to run on, so you're not tacking like a sailboat. Most companies, even in large companies and in small and medium size, forget about the execution of that strategy. And if indeed you build a beautiful strategy and nobody works that strategy for accountability and productivity, and then profit and sustainability doesn't come about very easily. And the last one I always have to giggle about, because it's not in my area of expertise, but it certainly makes a big difference, is cash. If you don't have the money in the bank, or the money's coming through investment of some sort to run that business, then the highs and the lows really do make impact much differently than if you've got a sustainable, profitable company. So those 4 things working together in whatever size company is important. And I think I might have lost track of where you wanted me to go with it, but I think that foundation is really important when
Well,
you're working with companies, no matter what size.
well, I'm curious about this. The third one, the no,
Execution
execution
management.
performance. Yes, because I mean, let me see if I hear you right. What you're saying is you can have a great strategy, you can have great people, but if you don't actually perform and do what you're supposed to do or intend to do, am I hearing you right?
You are indeed, and it's an underdeveloped area of what consulting and businesses do. One of the best things that I found, well, what I did is I went out and found the best tools I could find, because people don't always like to pay for what goes on in your head. They like to have something they can hang on to.
Yeah.
So what I did is I found tools for the people part and the strategy part and the execution management. And one of the things that I found was that Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, the people thought that they were doing a great job in communication. They thought they were doing a great job in accountability, and they weren't at all. And that's because they didn't know how to take that strategy and move it into an actual day-to-day activity. So I found another tool, and several actually, and when you put those tools in place, then people have things to go back to refer to. And what happens lots of times is companies or leaders will follow the most bright, shiny new thing and never put that foundational stuff in, and then they are all over the place again, and they're being reactive rather than proactive. And what execution management allows for is that day to day, am I working on the things that actually make this company what it's supposed to be? And if I'm not, why am I not doing that? Mm-hmm. And then if through a series of different kinds of checkpoints, you don't even need to do performance reviews, because what you're doing is checking all the time. Is this person doing what they're supposed to be doing in the job that he or she is in, so that the productivity is at its highest point? You catch it real quickly that way.
You know, it's interesting. I remember recently I wrote a blog well, recently, it's been several months actually. And I said, you know how time goes by. I remember saying, performance evaluation really should be performance observation. You should be watching all the time and responding all the time. But I want to come back to a word you use, which I think people have difficulty translating into what it means on the ground.
Okay.
And that is that word accountability. How do you say this person is acting or feels and acts as if they know they are accountable for their work? And how do I help them do that?
Well, the proof is in the pudding, and what really happens is if you create a performance agreement with the employee as a manager, the leader, who is the direct supervisor, puts together with that employee a performance agreement and indicates the things that are the factors that are necessary for that job to be a productive job. And then what happens next is you put together what happens if I don't perform in that area. What is the missed that would be my measure? And then you jump up to what happens when I hit it out of the ballpark, because that's when I have really performed at my highest and best. And everything in the middle is what is the day-to-day activity that I'm responsible for. And by honing in on specific things that happen in my job, instead of having, well, today I need to be doing this and tomorrow I need to be doing that, there is no accountability when there isn't, again, another plan to run on. So when you run a little tighter ship and actually take the parts of the strategy that each department and then each individual is responsible for, then it's easy to look at accountability. And if you have what is called a huddle at the beginning of the day to say, these are the things that are most important to get done, and then you review with your team, whether it's the manager who does it or the team gets together and has a conversation. What did I accomplish today? Where do I need help? What are we missing? Asking all those questions constantly keeps people on track. Did that answer that question a little bit better?
Well, did it ever? And not only that, it reinforced one of the practices that I have in my book, that every day you should look at what you need to do and do the most important thing first.
Right.
And that could be to call your mother, because, we live in more than just our work life. I mean, sometimes our family has to take precedence, but certainly the key is what's the most important thing and get it done.
That's
so
right.
Then you have contributed to your strategy, to your life, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, people used to laugh at me all the time because my calendar always had things like hair appointment or dentist appointment or call my sister, because they were activities that needed to get done. And if I didn't put them in someplace, they didn't happen.
They didn't happen. Yeah. You said something else, which I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about before, that in a performance plan, you also talk about not just doing it, but what if you don't do it? What are the signals that say you're not meeting that? Or what are the signals that say you excelled?
That's right.
That's a nice addition.
Well, and if you're looking at those things on a continuous basis, then you are doing what you were talking about and being in the moment with performance, as opposed to 6 months later, you didn't do this or you did do this. It just is a better way to handle it. And it was interesting because one of my clients, who is only has 32 people in the company, but they play with the big boys in the area of automation of systems, let me put it that way. And what I think is so interesting is every one of his people know exactly what they're supposed to do and know when they are on track and when they aren't. And they're their worst enemies with performance, because they're telling him all the time, well, I could have done this better, or I could have done that differently. And so he just didn't believe in performance reviews. He says, if you aren't performing and you aren't talking to the people you're responsible to, then you probably are not going to be accountable in the long run.
Great. Well, now you've also, you've also worked in university.
Yes.
So I'm curious, what does your work in education bring to your current emphasis in corporation?
Well, my mother wanted me to always be successful, and her idea of success was having a job, a real job. And so the first, yeah, so I have all these degrees, and in my time when I came up through the business, through education and business, it was just easier to go into education, and because women didn't have the positions in organizations they do today. And so I started out in education, and then spent some time in large organizations. And then I thought, well, heck, everybody else is determining what is happening to me, and I'm not. So I stepped back into teaching online, and I was one of the forerunners of teaching online.
Aha.
And then I was tapped to develop a program of leadership and organizational development, and realized that my audience were adult learners, and so constantly, lost my thought. So what happens is those adult learners are in transition. If they're going back to school at 40 and 50 and even beyond that, they're in transition. They are already successful at something, and they wanted to do something different. And so that set up a whole different kind of line of work. And I was always working parallel. Like I took a 2-year, Stratagems took a 2-year job with the university to create that curriculum and get that off the ground. And then I taught in that. But when Stratagems was busy doing the work, because I'm a kind of company of one, and we'll probably talk about that later, I couldn't go out and market. So when I was busy doing Stratagems work, then my educational stuff stepped back. When I needed to go out and develop the business, then I really stepped into education. And so I was always working in that parallel capacity. And what it did is it kept me very current, because again, adult learners are already successful. So I was constantly learning about different businesses, different careers, different ways of looking at things, and it was right up my alley.
Oh, I like that strategy. And you're right. When you're dealing with adults in the classroom, it's a very different experience for the teacher. In fact, I would often say to my students, I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to help you learn.
And I used to say to my groups of people when they came in, whether it was in business or whether it was in education, the time you're going to spend with me, I'm going to respectfully mess with your mind. And I'm going to mess and I said it because I wanted to be able to challenge perspectives. I wanted to challenge thinking. I wanted them to push that envelope out and look at possibilities differently than they were right then and there. And it was exhausting for them, and it's exhausting for me. And we'd come away and we'd say, that was exciting. And I think that I kind of get up every morning with love in my heart, and I try to do 3 things. One is try to find joy in something that's going on every day. And then I try to laugh, because especially now, everything's so distracted and energetically funny that you have to laugh or you drive yourself nuts. And then I try to also learn something every day, because that's what keeps my mind active. And those 3 things together make a pretty busy day.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a more specific question about your students. As you watched them develop, because that's what you're there for, really, is to help them develop. How did you see their lives shift and their careers shift from they would obviously were taking a conscious amount of time to learn something specific?
Well, I think you started at the right point, the time, that the commitment has to be there. And if that commitment is not, it's a lot of waste of time and money, quite frankly. But how I saw them change as I helped them take a look at whatever it was they wanted to study, is that I kept asking questions. What is it that you want to see as the end result of this? Where do you think you're going to go with it? How does what you're doing right now make a difference in your community, in your life, and in the lives of the other people that you want to work with. And because I kept asking, I'm curious. I've got to know something about everything. So when they were busy trying to figure out how to do quantitative, qualitative research, I was trying to figure out what they were doing in that area, whether it was in the area that they were already working in or whether it was in an area that they were exploring. So I was reading right along with them, and I was asking a billion questions. And what that does is it keeps their mind sharp. So I found them using critical thinking a lot differently, making
Yes.
decisions a lot differently, committing to time differently. And I'm a little bit of a taskmaster because when I did my doctorate, I didn't have, it was so early on in the game that they didn't even have the qualitative research that they have right now. And my degree is actually in philosophy. So I was, well, they didn't have the specialization. So
You're
you
right.
either went into a EDD, which was not considered a research degree, or you did the philosophy. And then you applied it in whatever area you did. And one of the things that was so important to me was being able to challenge that thinking and try to see what was different. And I think that's where I had a mentor who challenged me in the 60s, 70s, evidently, actually, to look at what was happening in the women's movement. He was a real forerunner in women's education and also in women in business. And he said, you know, this women's movement is doing all kinds of things for women, and everybody are talking about it, but you need to write a thesis here, and why don't you write it on something that is adjacent to it? And that's where I got that adjacent edge piece. And so I wrote about what was happening to men because of the women's movement. And it was, again, it was interesting. When I did my doctorate, I was looking at education, and we had started to move into the metrics as a measure and not into the learning as an experience. And so I looked at what happens if we teacher direct learning as opposed to student direct learning, and what happens because of that. Well, my study wasn't real popular because I found that people actually retained more, learned faster, and covered more territory if they were directing their own learning, which is something I have. Yeah, it's, you know, it started early, and it's manifested into some very interesting things. And, you know, I remember sitting in one of those 2-year business mentoring sessions, and the facilitator said, well, when you are successful, and I don't remember the rest of it, because a man stood up in that session right there, and he says, wait a minute. He says, I have an $8 million company, and it's going to be a $20 million company. And he did commercial landscaping. And he says, I'm already successful. I'm here because I need to learn to become more efficient and effective. Wow. And so again, my lessons learned are always, you know, I kind of stack them up and then say, okay, what do we want to do and how do we want to get it done? And here's what I can offer.
Fabulous. Well, I want to shift gears slightly.
Okay.
Because you recommended that I read a book called A Company of One by Paul Jarvis. Now, as I read it, I had to laugh because when I started my company 35 years ago, it was exactly my intention to remain small for several reasons. And I recall others saying that I was crazy. Madeline, you always should build your company to grow. And I said, no, I don't really want to. So it was really fun reading his premise that, in fact, this is a great place to be. So we always use growth as a measure. So talk about why you found this book so helpful to you and in your work especially.
Well, I think it comes down to a couple of things. Every time that I've either worked for money or had a company that was only looking at the growth and profitability, what happened is that they forgot about their people, and the priorities weren't in the right place. And so what happens is they hire too many people that they don't need because they aren't putting the right people in the right places and getting that structure in place. They sometimes go out and spend money on equipment and big office buildings and all kinds of stuff. And then they can't support the benefits for the people and the payroll. They can't support the the size of the buildings and the leases and things like that. And what happens is they lose focus. And if they're not careful, they can lose the company. So when I read Company of One, and he was talking about organic growth, and organic growth so that you can not only blend, and I'm not a big fan of this life balance thing, because balance is a fulcrum. And so you're always teeter-tottering. But I think that if you blend the two and you look for growth both in your personal life and in your business life, what you end up with is a fullness and a richness that comes together a whole lot differently. And since I'm a little bit on an inflection point in my own career, when I ran into that book and I was thinking of what am I going to do next and how am I going to do it? Do I go, and I don't believe going backwards is what you need to do. Do I re-energize my consulting and start doing the things I've always done with a lot of companies? That means a lot of networking. It means a lot of different kinds of activities. Or do I do something that blends where I am in my life with what I want to accomplish by still being viable both mentally and in the community? And I've chosen to blend and do the organic growth of stratagems and what my other endeavors, rather than to try to figure out how fast I can grow a company.
You know, it really does shift your attention. It shifts what you see, and obviously it then shifts how you proceed. And I love the word organic. Happened to be an organic farmer for many years.
Well, you know, one of the companies, well, several of them that I work with, you know, they show up every now and then when they need me and I need work. It's just funny how it happens. And one of the things that keeps coming up over and over again is I feel so guilty every time I take any time off. I've missed this of my family. I've missed that. And I can't get that time back. Well, yeah, time's finite. And yet they want to make their company successful, sustainable, and profitable. And so, again, every time I read something, I pass it along to somebody else like I did to you. And what it is doing, it is making that shift. It is helping people realize there's more to life than the numbers on the spreadsheet. And that, again, when the focus is on doing the right thing the right way and staying focused on that, some of it starts to just generate a lot differently. That doesn't mean you don't go out and do the hard work. You still have to do the hard work, but you look at it differently and you relax into it differently. And it makes a huge difference in how the whole organization will work too.
Okay, then this is a perfect segue into my next thought, which is, if you were a CEO of a mid-sized company today, what would you be focusing on?
I think I'd be focusing most on resilience and agility, because work is not like it was 10 years ago, let alone 30 years ago. And what is good today is being replaced so quickly that if you get stuck in a box on saying this is the only thing we can do, it's going to be hard to be successful and sustainable. So I would focus on putting together an organization that has a purpose, whatever that organization is going to do. But then I would make sure that I had people who were curious, people who wanted to be in the work environment, wanted to do some kind of work, and then were doing it. And then I would make sure we were always looking out. I kind of work like an accordion. You go out there and you pull it apart and see what's going on, and then you bring it together and focus, and you pull it apart and then you bring it together. And by doing that, taking both a long and a short-term look at things, I'd be able to work together with my people to become more flexible and agile in this crazy environment.
In this crazy environment, that's right. Okay, I'm going to ask you another question that relates to this. Let's say you're not a CEO of a mid-sized company. Let's just say that you are a leader. Maybe you're a division chief, maybe you're a supervisor, and you have a team that you have to deal with. And that team was perhaps one you inherited.
Oh, I did that a couple of times.
So, and I'm picking up on this aspect that if you have the right people in the right jobs, but you've inherited this, so you know there's going to be a mix. So what are some strategies that someone can use in that situation?
Well, I think first you have to have an understanding with each of those employees is what they think their job is, whether it's what it is or what they think they're supposed to do, and how they have grounded themselves in the organization. Many organizations, if they haven't looked at if they haven't looked at jobs and then hired people to do the jobs, they've hired people and then create the jobs around them. So people are doing things that may or may not be productive just because that's what they wanted to do when they got there. So I think it's important if you end up with a team that you didn't create yourself, that you help them realize that the business is a business that has a job to get done, and everybody has to become part of that job, that larger job, to get it done. So finding out what they think their job is and then helping them realize what they're probably going to have to do is important. And then by taking the strategy, if there is a strategy, and if there isn't, creating a strategy, because I was in the unfortunate position of having a budget and a responsibility, and I had 82 people that were responsible I was responsible for, and then another 7 that were full-time that I was responsible for. And the full-time people didn't have a clue about what they were supposed to do to be productive every single day. And I had a budget, but I had no idea what those numbers were. I just knew that I had to be part of it. So what I had to do was really start from scratch and say, okay, we have a job to do here, and we're all here doing something, but let's do something that each one of us does to make this whole unit move forward in a different way. And I think you have to do that. And then sometimes people are going to fit and sometimes they're not. And then you have to help them figure out how to find a better place for themselves to be.
I love that last sentence. I think that people feel that if they don't fit, that's the end of their life. And that's not the case, especially if they have a manager who understands that, okay, this person has skills, has value they can bring to the table. We just have to get them to the right table. And then through discussion and conversation,
either find them a place within the organization that they fit better in, or help them find a way to go forward outside of the company. And I can't tell you how many times I've written referral letters or made recommendations for people that would help them move along. When I was starting out, I still have, she's a good friend. She made a really important point. And she said, we didn't have a lot of help moving up and out in our jobs because we were supposed to do it all on our own. She said, but if we reach up and find mentors that will help us and promote us, and also reach back, not down, but back, or to help the younger people coming forward, then we're always in a place of movement and in growth. And it stuck with me.
Yeah. Well, again, that's you seem to be my straight man instead of me being here. Because what I'm thinking now is we have about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Before we have to wrap. And I'm curious, let's say that I'm a 28-year-old. Should I even be thinking about mid-sized companies? How do I build a real career for myself? And I know that you've even been writing on this subject of how you develop. So why don't you expand on that?
Well, I think that too many times we were led to believe that our education and jobs would be there forever. So we'd get an education, we'd get a good job, and then we'd stay and we'd move up in that organization. Well, that hasn't panned out very well, especially over the last little while. And the people who say, well, wait a minute, everybody else is directing my life and I'm not directing it, are going to be in confusion a long time, and they're likely to be unhappy, and they're likely not to be able to feel very fulfilled. Early on, I think I've always been a little bit of a maverick, and I always am pushing that envelope out a little further than staying in it, but still pushing it out. And what I found is, because I was curious, I would encourage them to check out anything that they were interested in. Research it far enough so they know whether they'd like it or not, and then find out what it takes to be employed in that area, whether it's archaeology, whether it's history, whether it's technology, whatever it is. Find out about it, and find out about it in a way that you can capitalize on it in some place, and then you got to sell yourself. I mean, I'm not talking about into slavery or into any kind of a compromising position. What I'm talking about is you've got to be able to demonstrate that you've got the skills that those employers are going to need, so that you can create the job that fits where you want to be in your life. And I think we need to start talking about it that way, both as employers and as future employees. If I go in and say, well, tell me what I can do for you, without thinking about what needs to happen for me, it's not going to work out very well. So I think that whole idea of becoming the driver of my career, the driver of my life, and do it in a self-directed manner by being curious and learning, and then offering those learnings in a way that others can find profitable, is going to be the way that of the future for a 28-year-old person, not expecting the system to do it for you.
Yeah. And even that 28-year-old, if I hear you right, yes, should be reaching forward, but also reaching, as you said, back, not down, but back, so that they know that, believe it or not, even at 28, you have a responsibility for people who are younger than you.
I had dinner with some friends. In fact, it was a big family gathering over Easter. And a very young person, she's 23, is a civil engineer. And she does really interesting things in companies. And another person who happens to be a vice president of a company has saying, well, you have a responsibility. You need to make sure that the young people are coming along, and that you're helping them become engineers like yourself. And I bit my tongue, because it isn't somebody telling me that I have to do that. I need to look for the opportunities where I can help bring somebody forward.
Yeah.
A young woman, early on, I got a puppy, and he was a rescue puppy. And it was at Christmas time, so I was taking him to all my clients because I couldn't leave him at home. And we were delivering packages. And she fell in love with my crazy little puppy. And she was in an accounting position that she didn't like. And so she reached out to me. I was traveling at the time a lot. And she reached out to me and she says, can I get to know you better? And I said, sure. And so today she does my books for my company. She takes care of my animals when I'm gone. Mm-hmm. And she's so much younger than I am. And yet she keeps me so current in what young people think about. And I help her see a way that she can continue to be productive. She has changed jobs a couple of times, and now she is in her first management position. What fun we've had together. And that's what I'm talking about. It isn't telling somebody that they have to bring somebody along. It's reaching and bringing them along with me, or going up and saying, hey, I want to be like you. How do I do that?
Yeah, fabulous. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation, Sandy. Of course, I knew it was going to be. But...
Yeah, I did too. And I'm so excited. And I really appreciate being part of this today.
Oh, just fabulous. Well, I wonder if you have, you may have just done your closing comments, but do you have any closing comments further that you want to give to the audience?
The biggest thing is I want to thank you for this opportunity, because it's part of what it means to spread the word and be part of the community. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I've had a ball. And then the other thing I think is important is to look at risk, and look at risk in a way that is positive rather than negative. A friend of mine who happens to be a multimillionaire said to me once, you know the difference between millionaire thinking and, I call it, mere mortal thinking? And I said, no, you tell me. And he said, millionaires take a look at and try something out. And if it works, they try it and do some more of it. And if it doesn't, they look at it, look for the lessons learned, and say, next. Mere mortals look at something and they put all their effort into it. And if it works, they do it the same. They hold it close. And they say, I'm not going to do anything more because I got it. And if they fail, they say, oh, I'm never going to do that again. And they go back into a place where they aren't curious and they aren't resilient, and they get stuck. So my lessons learned here, and the way I look forward is don't be afraid to risk. Look at it as a learning opportunity, and if it works, do more of it, and if it doesn't, say next, and then be off on the next journey.
Oh, great. Well, Sandy, again, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Wow, what I particularly noted today was that last one, to just keep going. Don't get stuck. I also enjoyed what she said about the blend of our lives as opposed to trying to balance them. I love that. Well, the robustness of the U.S. economy begins with small and medium-sized companies, and many young people are looking to open their own companies so they can have greater control over their lives and their careers. Growing your company should be a choice, but once chosen, there are strategies to help it grow and remain sustainable. And today, I think Dr. Sandy Kolberg described 4 necessities. She called it the right person in the right job, a strategy, the execution management, make sure that you actually do it, and cash. And she's right about cash. Having run a small company for 35 years, you always watch your cash. What I love about this list is that any person can use it to work on their own career strategy as well. Well, I promised at the beginning that I would also give you the full list of shifts in the McKinsey report on the State of Organizations 2023. They identified 10 significant shifts. And the main message, by the way, was how to make organizations more resilient in crisis and normal shifts in the environment. We couldn't cover all of them today, but I thought I would list the 10 that McKinsey found. First, that resilient companies generated better total shareholder returns, 50% higher than their less resilient peers. 4 of 5 employees who have worked in hybrid models and want to retain them. The use of applied AI has doubled since 2018. And only 5% of respondents say their organizations have the capabilities needed for the work. And matching top talent to high-value roles offers multiple benefits. Sandy certainly reemphasized that. And leaders aware of themselves and the operational environment must be built. Diversity and equity efforts are not translating into meaningful progress. Global health and well-being scores remain poor, and organizational structures need to more effectively deploy resources where they matter the most to deal with the immediate crises or getting the same work done with fewer resources. It's a challenging list, but we all love challenges when we have ideas about possible solutions. And I hope today you heard a lot of them. Wow. That list, every time I go through it, it just sort of throws me. There's just so much happening today. But I really appreciate how McKinsey articulated them so that I can decide, okay, this is the one I feel the most right now. And so let me work there. You can learn about what's coming up, by the way, on Unlocked on my website, madelineblair.com/unlocked. Unlocked TV, sorry. It's a pull-down menu, and replays of every one of the earlier shows are right there as well. And if you're thinking that, oh, Madeline, you haven't talked about X, and I really want you to talk about that, let me know. Send me an email at madeline@madelineblair.com. I read all my emails. And if I read that you want a particular topic, I'll go and look for the best guest to respond to it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Unlocked. And if you did, I want you to make a comment on social media. You might say what you learned and what you might do differently as a result. And if you're on YouTube watching, click the like button. And if you haven't done so, subscribe. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.